All right, so I met Typsum Watch Company in New York during one of their watch shows, and I came across a very interesting looking diver, which is very reminiscent of the Blancpain 50 Fathoms. Now, this is actually going to be the first true gilt dial on the channel to date, and I'm excited to show this one off to you guys today. Before I do so, could you please click that like button? That is the most charitable way to help support the channel. And also, I wanted to just show you guys briefly the boxing. It's actually a cardboard box. It's got a sleeve and it's got some felt inside. It's got a very Rolex styled pillow, as you can see, which is also done in felt. And it's got a secret compartment, which is no longer a secret, with the polishing cloth, some booklets, their warranty card comes with, and here you go, guys. I actually got a little bit of a giggle with this one, and I'm going to get into this on this episode of So I want to address the elephant in the room, which is indeed not what you see here, but the price tag. The price tag is coming in at $1,199 US. Now, when you pick yourself up off the floor, let me explain to you why this watch may or may not be worth that kind of money. Pricing is very subjective, and I'm never going to sit here and tell you that this watch is worth that money or it's not worth that money. That's up to you to come up with. So what I can do is give you guys the information needed for you to determine whether or not this watch is indeed worth the money. All right, so you're probably wondering, why in the world does he have a Breitling that's 20 years old? It's a luxury brand, nowhere near the price. Even when we look at it today, 20 years later, it's still more expensive than this one. Well, hold your horses for a second. I'm actually not comparing the two watches at all. But they both have a similarity that you can see if you take a close look at the dial and how they both play with the light. When you look at the lettering and you look at the minute track, you'll see with both watches that they both play with the light. Now, there's two distinctly different processes to obtain the same result with these two watches, but you get a similar result with each. So with the Breitling, they use a French word, which I don't know if there's a French process, but it's a French word, par et parn, which essentially is the machining of a solid sterling silver dial. And essentially it's being machined, or there's an etching process. I've actually tried to do some research on par et parn, and there's not a lot of detail in regards to this process. Now, I do know that the Breitling Navitimer 01 uses the same exact process where the lettering is dancing with the light. You also get that with the minute tracker as well. So essentially what you're seeing is the solid silver peeking through the black dial. Now, this is a different process than a true gilt process. And as you can see, with the gilt process, it's more of like night and day type of, like everything disappears in darkness and appears in the light, as opposed to here where you always see it. And you see a little bit more of a dancing effect where it's more of like, certain letters or certain parts will actually be more lit up than the rest, but it never completely disappears like with the gilt process. So in the gilt process, essentially what's going on here is there's a proprietary clear coat that they use. And what happens is the clear coat is essentially the stamping process that they use. So whatever the template that they're using, so here they're using Typsum automatic, and they wanted the minute tracker. And they stamped that onto the dial with a clear coat. And then what happens is there's a galvanized coating process that is typically, that's really just black paint that's galvanized onto the dial. The clear coat prevents the black paint from binding on to these particular sections, and therefore you see the silver peeking through. So two very distinctly different processes, but similar results, but as you can see, definitely not the same. So I'd like to hear what you guys think down below on which dial you prefer. Again, not a fair comparison, so there you go. The gilt process in and of itself, to get a true gilt dial, is a more expensive process. And the term gilt is used pretty loosely in the watch world. It's almost like the way that tourbillon is used in regards to more cheaper watches that just have an open heart design. I think there's a little bit of ignorance in regards to some people in regards to gilt. Gilt can mean a couple different things. Now, Typsum does have a 200C that actually has the gold lettering that is showing through, and that is actually one definition of a gilt. You know, there's some people refer to it as, you know, gilt lettering. In this case, though, it's true gilt because it's the actual process instead of just having the gold lettering or gold indices. For instance, when I did a search on gilt dials, I came up with many watches that did not, that are definitely not gilt, but they just simply had gold lettering, you know, gold minute trackers and indices. That's not true gilt at all, and that's actually using the term pretty liberally, if you ask me. So the gilt process obviously is an expensive process. Now, the other thing, or the other expensive piece in this particular watch, is the movement, which is the Sellita SW300 movement that they use here. And that actually, it's actually a SW300-1 movement, which is a $300 movement. So obviously this can't be a $300 watch if you're putting a $300 movement in here. The gilt process is a process that is obviously one that costs more money because it takes more time. It's a skill set that not everybody has. It takes specialized equipment. So again, an added cost there. But again, do we come up with that price tag? I don't know. Let's take a look at the rest of the watch and see if we can determine that. We do get a 39 millimeter case diameter, but when we measure the bezel itself, the bezel is coming in at a 41 millimeters. Lug to lug, we're getting a 47.5 millimeter lug to lug. Our thickness is coming in at 12.7 millimeters, and our lug width is 20 millimeters. One of the big disappointments that I have right away is the fact that everything is done in acrylic. So we have an acrylic crystal and an acrylic bezel, and obviously this would be acrylic as well. Can't call it a Cyclops because that is a Rolex term. This is indeed a date magnifier. They did it very well, by the way, guys. I mean, if you take a look at the date peak in there, and then we see it here, it definitely magnifies it. And it is centered, and you can see it at all different angles. So one of the best date windows I have seen, or should I say magnifiers, aside from Rolex, obviously. So my disappointment here is indeed the domed acrylic crystal. Now acrylic does have anti-reflective properties, so it does help with that. But ironically though, and I actually got a little bit of a giggle, but when I opened up the packaging, there was some polywatch in there. So yeah, they can be buffed out and whatnot, but it is a cheaper material, and when I'm spending good money on a watch, I don't want to have to constantly be buffing out scratches and scrapes and whatnot on my dial and even the bezel. So that's just me, because I think in this day and age, you can get the same effect with sapphire without a problem and just use some anti-reflective coating. Now, the bezel action is actually pretty good. Take a listen to it. 120 click bezel. Actually, I can't get much back play at all. So very, very good bezel, very good bezel action. If you take a look at the notches here on that bezel, it's done very, very nicely. We do get polishing on the case sides, we get brushing on the top, and we get a very substantial chamfered edge that goes all the way around and to the other side. Now, this is a 5-link bracelet that has a mismatch of brushing, polishing, brushing, polishing, and that's done very nicely as well. Comes with rivets and a screw system. This is where I'm going to zonk the watch though, even though it does come with the screw system, guys. And the only reason I'm zonking this is because I'm paying, if I was a buyer, $1,200. You're going to need to have yourself 2 screwdrivers and figure out how you're going to keep the one screwdriver from not moving and using the other screwdriver to unscrew these screws. What a royal pain in the you know what. And I think most people are going to take this to a jeweler to get this sized. Whereas a lot of watches nowadays, and I'm going to bring up Mark from Long Island, he does this very well, where he actually has the one screw that actually goes into the last link and screws into that link, so that all you need to do is just take a screwdriver and simply unscrew it. I would highly recommend it with this particular watch, especially when you're paying this kind of price tag. You shouldn't have to be aggravated by your watch sizing it, and I think that to me is a huge negative with this bracelet. On top of that though, or should I say besides that, you do get a scissor style milled clasp here, and we do get brushing and polishing on this with the Typsum logo there. And I think the clasp is actually done very nicely. You get the dual deployant, and check that out. Very nicely done. Bracelet does feel good, and it does taper. So it's, you know, it's a nice bracelet, but that is just a huge negative to me, and I'm sure it would be to you as well if you're sizing this. We do get drilled lugs, which is a nice touch. Another negative for me, which is more of a personal preference, and I'm going to pop the picture up here. This is a really nice looking movement. This is very highly decorated in my opinion for a watch in this price point. And I think by putting a solid case back on here, you're really doing yourself a disservice when it actually does have a really nice looking movement with the Typsum logo on the rotor itself. Movement itself is done really nicely, and I think you guys kind of dropped the ball there in regards to that. I think it would have been a great opportunity to show off some of the reason why this watch is so expensive. Yeah, here, you have to be a hardcore watch enthusiast to say, okay, Gilt dial, okay, check. SW300, oh, okay, definitely impressive. But looking at this watch in and of itself, and I'm going to be completely transparent with you. When I took this watch out of the box, I had no idea what I was getting. I just said, you know what, this is a cool looking watch. I didn't do any research on it. And I'm glad I did, because my initial impression of this watch was a watch that was under $500 in my opinion. And that's not a knock on the watch. It's just because I know this is a micro brand. And, you know, it actually has a solid build quality. So I was thinking, you know, $400 to $500 for something that has a Miyota movement in it, something like that, right? These were my assumptions. But then when I looked deeper into it, I almost fell off my chair when I discovered the price. And I said, you know what? I'm not going to judge this watch very quickly. Well, for me, I know this is more of a hardcore watch enthusiast watch, okay? You have to be a fan of the Blancpain 50 Fathoms, right? You have to be a fan of vintage styling inspiration to even appreciate this, you know, the styling and the acrylic and just everything, right? So I think definitely they definitely captured that with this watch. I mean, you even see that moisture indicator there at the 12 o'clock with that blue and what looks like to be a more patinaed looking indices that they have here. And when we look at that, we do see bigger indices at the 9, 6, and 12 positions. For a lot of those guys out there with OCD, this could be a problem, but for me, not a big issue. Do have a really nice looking handset. I call that, some people call these sword style hands. That hour hand to me definitely looks like a tie. I just can't get that out of my head, but you guys can call it whatever you want there. Obviously, we look at the bezel here, and that pip there definitely is a nice pace, nice homage to that Blancpain 50 fathoms. We take a look at this on a time graph. We are getting a 42-hour power reserve, 28,800 beats per hour. Also, it's beating at 4 hertz. Another way to say that. This one is not the Chronometer certified, but they do call this a Chronometer grade movement. So this one is indeed performing like a Chronometer certified watch. So you will get that accuracy, but just not that certificate. If you want the certificate and you want the gold gilt, you're going to have to shell out $1,799. So you're going to pay almost $2,000 for that watch. Guys, I don't know. I mean, again, very subjective. I'm not going to be the one to tell you yes or no. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts down below. So there you go. I'm going to put this on my wrist and show you how it looks. And while I'm doing that, let me show you a loom shot of this watch, because that is also the star of the show indeed. This thing does obviously play with the light in the daytime, but it also is no slouch at night when we do have the bezel as well that is indeed luminescent. And they do use super luminova, and there's something special about this super luminova. They're saying it's an exclusive luminous compound that featuring a patina over time. I'm definitely seeing a patina right now as we speak, and I'm wondering if these indices and anything that is coated with super luminova, including the handset, will continue to patina as it ages. But there it is on the wrist, 7-inch wrist. Actually a perfect size, by the way. It wears extremely well on the wrist. Doesn't wear very high. It is definitely a slimmer watch because of the SW300-1 is actually a millimeter smaller, or should I say thinner, than the SW200. And the SW300 is definitely a movement that is put into watches such as the Tag Heuer. It's definitely a movement that is more suited towards a more luxurious watch. And you also have that really smooth movement of the crown, which I can show you guys right here. When we do unscrew the crown, these movements have the tendency to just pop, right? Now I do have my glycine here today, which is actually using a variation of the SW300 movement, which is the SW330, and this one also exhibits the same type of crown action. But we see that the crown pop out to that first position. That's where we wind it. Very quiet, very smooth, very quality feel. We take it out to the first position, and that's where we would set the date. It is a hacking movement, obviously, and very tight tolerances. Feels like a quality movement for sure. And then here's your date change, just like that. And this thing does change pretty close, if not at 12 o'clock. I always like to, I'm a sucker for a watch that clicks over. 12:02, not bad. That to me is just a attention to detail that I like to see with certain watches. Yeah. Well, there you go, guys. That's my 2 cents. You guys can keep the change, and always remember that there's always time to be kind to one another. Please take care of each other, and I'll see you guys next time on AvgJoeWatchReviews. God bless, my friends.